Now we go to Professor Andy Hrymak. Thank you very much for the speakers and panelists.
Well, thanks, Jesse. And that was a really great, stimulating discussion with the last two panels. We're starting a new group, and we'll be talking about the new student experience. And I think our speakers will continue to talk about blurring the lines in terms of how the students experience their education. We'll start out with a presentation on the future of integrated engineering. And this will be given by John Mitchell, who's a professor of communication systems engineering at University College London and is vice dean of education in the Faculty of Engineering Sciences and co-director of the Center for Engineering Education. He led the introduction of integrated engineering program and is published on curriculum development. He's a chartered engineer, a fellow of the Institute of Engineering and Technology, a senior member of IEEE, and a member of the board of directors of the European Society of Engineering Education. And he's also currently editor-in-chief of IEEE Transactions on Education. Also, Emanuela Tilly, who's director of Integrated Engineering Program in the Faculty of Engineering Science at UCL. Emanuela is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. And in 2013, she joined UCL Engineering and created the engineering design curricula and IEP challenges to introduce problem, experimental research, and inquiry-based learning to a multidisciplinary first-year cohort of engineering students at UCL. She champions a teaching and learning program based on self-awareness, teamwork, and leadership aimed at supporting students in development of engineering skills. So over to you, John and Emanuela. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. So my name is John Mitchell, and along with my colleague, Professor Emanuela Tilly, we'll say a little bit about the Integrated Engineering Programme, particularly why and what we've done at UCL, and then some of the things that have come out of the changes that have been made, and particularly the pandemic response, for some things that hopefully will stick and will be more long-lasting than just the response. So the IEP, the Integrated Engineering Programme, came about after our then dean, as deans sometimes do, they go to Global Engineering Deans Council, get all excited by the things that they see and come back and send out Sunday afternoon emails to the faculty saying we should change everything. And once the dust had settled on that, over the next 2 years, we developed a programme to make quite substantial changes to the way we taught. And one of the first things we looked at was how we frame what we think of engineering. And we picked up on this phrase as sort of an adaptation of the old Threadgood phrase about engineering being the art and practice of changing the physical world for the use and benefit of all. And we use this quite often because it speaks to a number of the things we wanted to achieve. First, the fact that it is art. Our students often come in not knowing that engineering is a creative subject, or not thinking about creativity being at the heart of engineering. They think it's about solving equations and knowing stuff. And we really want to show that engineering is one of the creative arts. It is developing things from scratch that don't exist. And that it is about practice. It is about bringing things to fruition and developing new products, new systems, new applications, whatever that may be. But also the fact that we have to understand the physical world in which we operate and how those resources and restrictions of the physical world are going to play a part. And this really speaks to having activities for students that are authentic. And we've already heard something about some of that today, of activities that really speak to what the students want to achieve and that they understand how they relate to the physical world, but most importantly, how they relate to people and society. And we wanted our students, and in fact our students were pushing for, the opportunity to understand how what they're learning actually makes sense and has good global impact and prepares them for being a globally responsible engineer. Now, many of our students get it, not all, and this is something we can pick up on later as to where that comes in. And so that led us to the development of the Integrated Engineering Programme, a programme that looks to be interdisciplinary and so connect our different disciplines, be inclusive and to promote diversity, but really at the heart of, and I think Jane talked about it a moment ago, this thread of projects and design and practice that runs right the way through the discipline. And we decided it was going to be a step change. So we did this for all of our core engineering degrees. So out of just over 1,000 students at the time that came into the institution, about 800 are on programs that were covered by this. And last year, just over 1,000 students entered these programs across the faculty. So it wasn't to rewrite those disciplines or to merge them into something that became more generalist, but it took the disciplines that were turned into grey silos, which wasn't intentional, but perhaps is a good euphemism for the courses. And our degrees were very separate. Silos, or cylinders of excellence, as Daniel Hastings once called them. They really were very few opportunities for students to collaborate. And the framework of the IEP is really about making those opportunities for students to collaborate with different disciplines and undertake projects in a meaningful sense. So the challenges that Emanuela led, and I'm sure we'll say something about, was really at the heart of bringing project-based learning supported by a professional skills agenda. And today we'll mostly talk about the mathematics, because I think this is somewhere where perhaps the shift has really been accelerated by the pandemic, but was a direction of travel from the beginning of changing the mathematics curriculum from a theoretical to a very applied and connected syllabus. The main things that we probably are known for and the students pick up on, though, are the scenarios and how to change the world. And I'll say a little bit more about what they are in a minute. And we also introduced a concept that in the UK was not that common. I know it's much more common in the rest of the world. The idea that students would be expected to do a minor, to do something outside of their discipline that was either outside of their discipline, whether it's languages or finance or management, or something that connected disciplines together. And so we had an energy minor, we have robotics, things that connect the disciplines together. We often draw it like this, and again, this has been mentioned already, the thread of projects that runs from the challenges at the beginning, these 1 week scenarios where we stop all the lectures and students undertake a project, really is at the heart of what we do, with the maths and the disciplines supporting it. So our students now do a lot more group work, a lot more design work, and really we try and bring the disciplines together. So right from the first day of the first week of their first year, they undertake a project in interdisciplinary groups. The second project they take has now got quite specific prominence, as it was a vaccine development, it was for TB, but it brought students together, the biochemicals and chemicals looking at the bioreactor, the civils and mechanicals looking at the water and power supplies, and the electronic engineers and computer scientists looking at the control systems, trying to bring teams together in a mode of consulting teams to both bring their own technical expertise, although this is in the second 5 weeks of term, so they're still developing them, but understand how parts of a much wider project interconnect. We also use challenges. This is the IMechE challenge. And so many end up with competitions. And so this is the product of 2 1-week scenarios where students build CAD models of these devices and then build and test them in the second 5 weeks. And this is sort of a good example of some of the scenarios that we run. And we have a capstone project effectively of that, where we end up with what we call How to Change the World. I know some in Canada might be familiar with the spin-off of this, where based on the Sustainable Development Goals, we put our students through a 2-week project, really a wicked problem. So unlike many of the scenarios where they're asked to design something that solves this problem, they're given a broad problem area and asked first to find a problem, to define their own problem within it, and where they feel their expertise can be brought to bear on an issue in a much wider set of things. So under clean water, it could be pollution in the Thames. And so it could be from stopping pollution getting into the Thames, cleaning the Thames, all sorts of different areas where they will address that comes to the end of our curriculum. So I'll now hand over to Emanuela to say a little bit more about one particular aspect of this.
Thanks, John. You're going to control the slides still, right? Brilliant. So in COVID's really given us an opportunity to bring scenario-based learning or project-based learning into our applied mathematics. So mathematics was overhauled first year and second year for much of our students across the faculty from 2014 when we started the IEP. However, it was really this year where we brought in the concept of using contextual problems to help students understand how mathematics is a tool in their engineering toolkit for problem solving. So to talk about this course as a clear example, it's an undergraduate course. It's taught in 10 weeks. It's the first term of their first year. There were over 1,000 students on this from 8 different engineering degree programs. And it was case study driven. So each week there was a contextual learning element that partnered the mathematical content that was delivered and learned by students, delivered and then learned by students. And the assessment was via coursework. So there were 2 rather contextual pieces of coursework and then an open book exam. And we have these at the end of the year. We work by terms, not by semesters. So the final exam was at the end of April, and they have an individual project. And we'd never gone into this space of final assessments being more coursework / project based. So it was really a new experiment, an exciting experiment for us. So the fundamentals, or the 3 elements of this course, are really to offer students a leveling up, so that the fundamentals were very clearly signposted in the blended space, so the virtual learning space, where their high school mathematics would support the learning of the core topics. And so that was self-paced, but it was the online nature of the delivery of this course really allowed us to put a link to an extensive library of material that we created for our students. And that's really important to us because not all students have their final, what we call A levels or high school mathematics and calculus and algebra like you would in your North American curriculum. So we really do need to give them that fundamentals. There are the core topics. And again, these are all supported by real world scenarios. And then we offer MATLAB as a software tool for students to use in their mathematical modeling and learning. So just to walk through some examples, we really use the online space to broaden the activities the students would use and how they would engage with the mathematical concept each week. So the first example I have here is week 4, where the students learn complex numbers. And if I think about my education, and I actually went to Western University back in the day, I didn't actually know the contextual elements of complex numbers until way past my first year, when I started actually using them in my projects and some of my analysis. So here we've given them opportunities to learn fundamental theories like the theorem there, and we would have the videos that would have been the lecture content in the face-to-face offering. But within and around those short snippet videos, there are practice questions where students get immediate feedback on how they did on the question. There would be the contextualization of how that is used in microphone design. And then we would also, in this case, do quizzes of their understanding of the use of this mathematical concept, as well as, and in this case, it's really interesting, the students had to go find pictures of real examples of complex numbers or represented in the real world on a Padlet or a collective website. And the students were able to kind of express their understanding of complex numbers. And so all of this happened before the workshop or the interactive live session, which was 2 hours long, led by an academic, where the students were broken down into groups and actually tackled a microphone design question using complex numbers and the learning that they had pre the workshop. So it's very much a flipped opportunity for the students to engage pre-workshop. but it was a really diverse way of getting the students to understand and come to the workshop prepared to learn mathematics in a very contextual way. So here the problem was about sustainable coffee production in Brazil, and this was our calculus week. And so they learned and they worked through a sustainable farming project using, you know, the derivation and integration. So again, on the slide you can see the very practical, workable problems that they can do in the virtual space, as well as the stories that we introduced them to via BBC videos and news articles. And then in the workshop, they had a real structured problem that they would take on board and use that pre-learning in the online Zoom session. And so those are two examples where we took advantage of the COVID situation, and we won't be going backwards. We won't, like many of you had said, there won't be lectures anymore on the content. But what we've done here is the students really understand week by week through the project, the mathematical concepts. So bringing in that authentic and contextual learning through projects was really important. And it's very interdisciplinary as well. So students are learning that microphone design, even if they're in civil engineering. And so this teaching framework really sums up a lot of our efforts across all of our, what John and I have presented here on the IEP. And mathematics was really, I suppose, the last part of our revolutionizing the curriculum. And so we are moving on, I guess, from a program, which in many ways is a teaching framework, because remember, we have degree programs for every discipline that the students, you know, across our faculty. And so it is really a teaching framework. And we're moving into the space of trying to, you know, broaden out those core elements of the IEP into what we would call an educational philosophy. And with John's Vice Dean Education hat on, he's leading that conversation in the faculty. And so these are the sorts of questions that we are really using to kind of spearhead that discussion. John?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, I think, yeah, there are still a few issues we need to resolve, and COVID, as we've seen, has thrown up some interesting anomalies. I mean, sometimes I reflect that if we hadn't put quite so much team-based and project-based learning in, adapting to COVID would have been much easier. But we've learned an awful lot by this process of what works online, and I think, you know, the challenge to all of us is going to be to think of, why do we put highly paid academics and a lot of students together in a room? How are they extracting the maximum value from that? And is it by, you know, I think Ishwar talked of the sage on the stage. I don't think it is, but it's what is our rationale for doing these sorts of things? And we're really looking to turn this program into something that spreads out into our postgraduate teaching, but also ensure that it sticks and it doesn't go back. And it's interesting, I think when we first made these changes, it hadn't occurred to me as to actually you build up momentum that keeps things going for a while, but actually keeping that momentum is almost as hard as starting it in the first place. As well as, and I guess this is a plug for my Centre for Engineering Education hat on, that we're very keen to work with others and help them develop these programs for their own context. And it's very important that it is for that context, as you know, this is, you know, specific, or every program is very specific to the local needs, and to help others develop similar activities. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That was a great presentation, and certainly you know, brought a lot of aspects of individual to group to team learning and problem-based learning. So thank you. Our next presentation looks at looking at integrating industry and inclusion into the engineering education and utilizing online delivery. Alexandra Knight from Brunel University. Alex is a chartered engineer and fellow of the IMechE with over 15 years of experience in industry, specializing in asset management. She's also a visiting professor with the Royal Academy of Engineering at Brunel University, London, bringing industry insights into academia. She represents the UK on the ISO 55000 committee and is a trustee on the board of the Women's Engineering Society. In 2019, she founded STE Amazing Limited, a social enterprise dedicated to inspiration and inclusion in STEM. So over to you, Alex.
Super, right. Thank you very much for having me. It's been really, really interesting hearing everybody's presentations and talks. I'm coming from a slightly different angle because I don't work in the university, as in I'm not employed by the university. I am a visiting professor at Brunel University in London. And this is a scheme that is run by the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK, where they try to encourage more industry professionals to engage with higher education in academia to set students up for success when they transition into industry. So my role as a visiting professor is all about improving student employability. And so what I want to talk to you about today is my experience of that and how I feel like I've done this scheme for 2 years now. The first year was going into Brunel and working with students in more traditional approaches. And then last year was obviously COVID and adapting to that. And my experience of how we responded with that engagement from industry into academia through COVID, I think has, like many people have said, presented so many opportunities to learn and improve how we maximize that engagement between industry and academia to benefit the students going forward in future. So I have seen a lot of the benefits. I've also experienced the challenges as well, and we've talked about those a lot already today. But what I'm hypothesizing is, how can we integrate more input from industry into academia and also ensure that we are, as again has been mentioned today around ethics, diversity and inclusion, maximizing that emphasis about how important diversity and inclusion is in industry to our students, so that this is not just a nice to have. They recognize that all engineering industry, all organizations are prioritizing this. They want to diversify their pipeline of talent. They want to make sure they are creating inclusive cultures. So how do we get that message across and start our students thinking in that way as early as possible, so they create the future inclusive STEM workforce that we desperately need? So I want to start off with the fact that engineering industry in the UK, and I'm sure this is not just a UK-based problem, has a major problem in that there are not enough engineers in the pipeline. We have a shortfall of engineers every year going into industry. Engineering industry is crying out for more engineers. To compound that, there is not enough diversity in engineering. So we do not have a diverse enough talent pool working in the STEM industries. And as we all know, that creates problems when it comes to innovation and creating inclusive solutions. And the third element to this problem is that graduates lack the workplace skills required by industry. So on one hand, we don't have enough engineers. On the other hand, we've got engineers that are graduating but are not getting jobs. So we've got this big problem. And my sort of, I suppose, topic for discussion here is, how can we use the lessons learned from COVID in doing more online delivery to try and support that and solve that problem? And I think looking at the problem, really, the elements of 1 and 2 are very much combined. So I think they're very much related. So not having enough engineers in the pipeline, we need to widen the talent pool that we are attracting and then retaining in industry. So attracting and retaining more women engineers, more ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, that is also important. We need to be doing more of that and a wider focus to widen the overall net that we are then encouraging into engineering industry. So let's just dig into that a little bit more. A study from Engineering UK back in 2018 highlighted really the numbers, the data around this, to say that it is about 60,000 shortfall of engineers annually. Okay, so we have a big shortfall of engineers in the UK annually, but the number next to that, 46%, is that engineering employers surveyed report that they have recruitment difficulties. So nearly half of the engineering employers surveyed said they have difficulties recruiting the right engineering talent. And then down at the bottom there, we've got that only 16% of engineering and technology undergraduates are female. So one aspect of the diversity spectrum, we've got a small percentage of undergraduates being female. And then when you look at actually going into engineering industry, only 12% of engineers in the UK are women. So only 12% is not enough. We need to be doing more to improve that. And obviously, engineering employers are looking to diversify their pipeline. They want more diverse talent. And that then links back to how are we engaging, inspiring, supporting as much diversity in higher education in engineering to then go on and transition into industry. Another key driver that we have in higher education in the UK towards greater diversity and inclusion is actually this accreditation from the Accreditation of Higher Education Programs, AHEP, from the Engineering Council, is mandating that in their latest standard that they've published, their latest version of this document, is that there has got to be a sharper focus on inclusive design and innovation and coverage of areas such as sustainability and ethics, some of which have already been touched on today, and the coverage of equality, diversity and inclusion is also strengthened. So in order to get your degree accredited by the Engineering Council in the UK, you have to demonstrate how you are covering equality, diversity, inclusion in your degree, so that then you can get accreditation and your students can go on and get chartered status. So it's very, very important. And this latest version, which was up-issued in August last year, has this new focus, or like stronger focus. So it's really important that universities in the UK are looking at how are they making sure they're including diversity and inclusion in their degree program, and giving students or showing students that that is very much an emphasis and is an important part of engineering education. So if we just go back to the problem space, as I said, I think it's got these three elements, with the two elements combined for the first one about the talent pool. The third bit being that the graduates that are coming out, fresh graduates, sometimes are disappointing in interview, and that they lack the workplace skills that are required by industry. So then, you know, the ones that are coming out are not even getting the jobs in engineering and may end up going into a different field altogether, which is a massive loss to engineering after all that effort that's gone into building them up. And so Royal Academy of Engineering research that digs into this problem a bit more showed that there was this mismatch between industry expectation of engineering graduates and the skills that graduates are coming out with. So one of the big takeaway points from that research was that industry want graduates to be more industry ready, so to be able to apply the theoretical knowledge to real industrial problems. And I'm so pleased to hear all the discussion today about project-based work and equipping students with being able to apply their theoretical knowledge, put it into context and make it, you know, relevant to them in the real world. So that is fantastic. And it's something that has been a real driver with the Royal Academy of Engineering. And hence they set up this visiting professor scheme, which I am now a part of, which is all about getting industry professionals who are experts in particular fields into academia. And it is fantastic. I mean, I love this scheme. I think I've seen the benefits in terms of my engagement with students and staff benefits as well. I think it's a fantastic scheme. that is funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering. So the Royal Academy of Engineering, pay me to spend some time at Brunel University each month. And it's brilliant, but I have to say there are challenges because the visiting professors are juggling their day job in industry. They're obviously very busy people, and trying to fit in the demands of being a visiting professor on top of your day job can be difficult. And this is where I feel COVID has really inspired us to think about how we can maximize that engagement efficiency and make it as efficient and as effective as possible for maximum impact for the students. So this is really the question, is can we learn from the pandemic and use online delivery, or continue to use online delivery more to tackle these problems of making students industry ready and giving them more relevant insight into why diversity and inclusion is so important, and therefore hopefully inspire more diverse communities of students to go into industry and actually make that transition into industry. So we're maximizing the diversity of the pipeline that we have. So I feel like this has been a key thing for me, is being able to integrate what I'm doing with the students and the staff at the Brunel University into a way that shows me as a woman engineer in industry as a role model for the students. And what I'm particularly passionate about is the importance of diverse, visible role models. Particularly the work I do with my business Stamazing is all about supporting women to be more confident and visible role models. And I feel like this is a key thing that is so important for students, both men and women students, is to see successful women in engineering, because we know that that not only inspires women, for example, so seeing someone like you inspires you. You see, you can't be what you can't see. So seeing someone like you inspires you and thinks, yes, I can get there. I've heard about all these challenges, but I can overcome it because I see her doing it. But also interesting research showing that men seeing female role models supports them. They don't feel any less capable in themselves, but they are more equitable. They see the playing field as more equitable. So they maybe challenge their unconscious bias about who can or should be a senior woman in engineering. And I feel like this is so important for supporting our future, more inclusive engineering workspace. So these are the 2 points that I've just said. I think diverse role models inspire and influence a larger and more diverse talent pool to go into and remain in engineering careers after university. And industry input helps develop industry-ready graduates with the awareness about industry, insight, and skills required by industry. And I really think these two things can very much be done together, sort of two birds with one stone here. If we have a diverse range of industry role models engaging with students. So my experience as a visiting professor, I have done lots of things in the last 2 years, from running workshops with students across many different engineering disciplines, from mechanical, electrical, chemical, civil, also through to working with staff at Brunel, getting involved in project work that's been international collaborations with different universities. It's been amazing, through to individual mentoring programs with students. And this is just one example. I delivered an MSc module on asset management, which is what I've specialized in industry. And I used my professional network that I've obviously built up over many, many years to include guest speakers with specialisms on individual aspects of this module, who could give real life relevant case studies of work they had done relating to the theoretical learning that the students were doing. And as you can see, this is the range of speakers that I got involved in that module. And you might notice they are all women. So I purposely did that because I wanted to show like there's not actually, when you dig into it, there's not a lack of talented women that are available to get involved in these things. You just have to know where they are. And obviously my work with the Women's Engineering Society, I have got a huge network of women engineers, and I feel like it's part of the value I can bring as a visiting professor to give the students opportunities to engage with these diverse role models. And we got great feedback from the students when they did their student survey marking or scoring, you know, their experience in this module. They rated sort of between 4.5, sort of around 4.5 out of 5, which is really, really good in terms of how they enjoyed it, benefited from it. This particular question was, did you find it interesting in helping you relate theory to real life applications, which is obviously our main purpose. And the fact that it scored nearly 4.5 out of 5 for that, I think is really good. So I was really, really pleased with that. So overall, the overall score was 4.5 out of 5. And I didn't have a lot of experience with this, but the lecturers were telling me that's a very good score. And the students were saying things like they found the format of the module with guest speakers excellent. It's been really interesting and informative. And if it wasn't for COVID, I would not have even thought to really do this, because all of these women have busy day jobs, and I wouldn't have asked them probably to spend a day going to Brunel to give a particular part of a lecture. And obviously they are based all around the UK, these women. So doing it online meant geography was not a barrier. Time was much less of a barrier. And ultimately that enabled us to really benefit the students. And another thing I've done with Brunel, working with the staff, is looking at, coming back to the Engineering Council, AHEP, is how to support the whole of the College of Engineering work more to include equality, diversity and inclusion in their practices. So we ran a session, or I led a session with support from other staff to facilitate discussion and get ideas from staff into how we can fulfill these 6 pillars that is the strategy at Brunel. And I'm able to bring my industry perspective and say, well, this is how we do it in work, and this is why it's so important to us. So how can we help the students to understand that and contribute to that as well? So that's been really interesting and rewarding. And I just wanted to finish going from that sort of college level down to an individual level with a young woman that I've been mentoring through my engagement with the university. I've mentored quite a few students, and this particular woman, Beverly, when I met her, she was a 2nd year student on doing her BEng in civil engineering, and she wanted to drop out of university. And when I questioned her about what were her, what were her drivers for wanting to drop out, was she struggling with the work? Was she not doing very well with her project work? No, she's a first-class student, getting straight A's in everything, but massively lacking confidence. And when she looked at what her future would hold in engineering, she couldn't envisage herself working there. She couldn't see that it was going to be a place she would feel comfortable working. So fast forward to now, which is about 1.5 years later of mentoring her, she's still at Brunel, she's still a straight A student. We have done a lot of work on her self-confidence, and now she's signed up to do her master's at Brunel. She's landed herself a summer placement in an engineering firm over the summer, and a year's internship in an engineering organization, a big engineering organization, Atkins. And when I first met her, she couldn't even face doing interviews. So this, obviously, combined with other things that the university offers her, has built her confidence and allowed her to see she has a future in engineering. And that is so important to me. So, from lacking confidence and ready to drop out to now absolutely nailing it, she's doing so well and has got her future, the next steps of her future mapped out for her. And I think this opportunity as someone in industry to mentor students, to support them with building their awareness of industry, building their confidence in communication skills, growing their professional network, encouraging them to step outside their comfort zone, because I can say, I was there, I've done it, this, many people I know were lacking confidence, this is how they've made it. Give them real examples and help inspire them and say, there are people like you in industry, you just need to look a bit harder to find them. And so, yeah, I really feel that online delivery has helped us deliver this level of opportunity more efficiently, because I wouldn't be able to do all the many things I'm doing if it wasn't for making it as efficient as possible for me. So that's a real success story. And so just to summarize, I feel like we've got this major problem, particularly in the UK, but I'm sure more broadly, where we don't have enough engineers, we don't have enough diversity, and graduates lack the workplace skills required by industry. But I think if we try and leverage what we've learned from COVID and integrate more input from industry, and especially more diverse role models from industry, to engage with students in a variety of ways, lecturing, online workshops, mentoring, it can really have so many benefits for the students and for the university. And I think it's something that hopefully we can learn to even continue improving the effectiveness of it, and really ultimately set students up for success with employability in the engineering industry once they've finished their degrees. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alexandra. A lot of great themes there and some great success stories. Thank you for sharing that. Our last topic presentation of this group brings together the online opportunity again that we've all experienced through the pandemic. Clayton Byers is Assistant Professor of Engineering at Trinity College in Hartford, USA. He's an Assistant Professor he teaches, engineering mechanics, materials, and thermodynamics in a liberal arts setting and performs research in turbulent flows. In their classroom, Clayton has an interest in transforming education and making the rigorous mathematics that forms the foundation of engineering into an interactive and exciting exploration of our world. He earned Princeton's Luigi Crocco Award for Teaching Excellence and Princeton Engineering Council's Excellence in Teaching Award. Prior to entering academia, he was a project manager with the U.S. Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center. Clayton, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I just have to say I feel a little bit intimidated being amongst all of you. I feel like the young punk who doesn't know much, so bear with me as I speak today. Hopefully you find this interesting and informative. So what I'm going to talk a little bit is about lessons learned from a hybrid classroom. Obviously, I think we all have very similar experiences going over the last 15, 16 months, and I'm going to reflect on a little bit at the start of the pandemic and move forward through this last year, and maybe give some insight as to how, at least from this small liberal arts school, how this online teaching, this hybrid classroom, and the in-person experience is informing myself and many of my colleagues here at Trinity College, informing how we're going to move forward in our education. Now, looking back at the spring of 2020, when we all had to go remote within a period of 2 weeks' time or so, I had to figure out, how do you effectively educate somebody without the infrastructure for online learning? We were used to the typical in-classroom experience. And so I had to maybe balance between doing something where you post videos or trying to hold some sort of synchronous online thing on Zoom. And I ended up deciding that with students all over the world, on the west and east coast of the United States, in Europe, Africa, and Asia, there was no way that I could effectively hold in-person classes or online in-person classes at one time. I couldn't expect my student in California to be online at 5 a.m. While my student in China was online at 8 p.m. It just didn't make sense. So, okay, we're going to make some videos. Now, that's a very common story with many of us here and many of us throughout this campus, putting together different kinds of videos. And so hopefully this shows up okay. I know Zoom kind of stutters. One of the goals I had put together was to deliver the content that we would usually go over in the classroom in small 5-10 minute chunks of videos. And so I try to do demonstrations, do the math, working through it and explaining how it all comes together. It was a great way to try to lend some sense of personality to this rather than a list of lecture notes, rather than some simple kind of math working, and get a little bit of that goofy in-person experience that the students maybe they're tired of, but at the same time, having some of that personal touch, at least here at this liberal arts institution, really makes a difference. So physical demos wherever possible, narrated presentation of concepts, derivations, relations, and worked through examples. These were all things that I put together for the remainder of spring 2020. Now, I wasn't sure if this was going to work well, but I figured it was the best shot I had. And overall, how did it go? Well, the students appreciated it. I was a bit more lenient in terms of how we would assess the students. I mean, how can I say, okay, you've got 50 minutes to take this exam when we're spread over the world? Very common theme that I've heard here today. And so there was a lot of leniency in terms of exams you can take at your own pace. You can take at whatever time you feel. It can be open book, open note. And so, of course, I saw test scores go up. So I can't really assess whether or not that's giving or whether or not I have delivered an effective education there. And that's a question that underpinned my whole previous year is how do you assess if you're effective at educating your students? But from that, I wanted to think, how can I take these lessons learned from the spring of 2020 into this previous year? And the starting point for me was to go to my students, to look at my course evaluations, but also to reach out to a number of them and actually get the direct feedback. And one of the common themes was that the students quite appreciated what I did in moving to these small delivered videos. There was a lot of feedback that students had given that said that other professors would just post notes, or they would say, oh, just read this chapter and we'll get on and talk for an hour. The students loved the videos. They felt that it was a great way to transition. And so I was grateful for that feedback. But this comment that I'm going to pull up here now, this was the comment that really got me to think about what I was going to do for fall of 2020 and spring of 2021. And they were saying how they loved online lectures, how they're sleepy in the morning, but I guess what student isn't sleepy in the morning? But how they want to get those meticulous notes, how they want to be able to take their time with the material, and having these online lectures where they can learn at their own pace was very helpful. And so that was something that really struck a chord with me. But at the same time, there's a tension here. There's a problem with this sentiment. And that problem is the vast majority of my students, while they appreciated this online transition, they had every intention, and our college allowed them to return to in-person learning this past year. Students wanted to be in person. Trinity College is a small school. We have 2,000 students, undergraduates. Our engineering department, we graduate about 20 to 30 students per year, right? 20 to 30 engineering students per year. So we're not that big of an institution. We had the capability of testing all of our students twice a week. We had a capability of keeping them spaced out. We had the capability of providing this in-person experience with social distancing. And so our students said, I want to be in person. So do I do some sort of asynchronous learning while we're in person? Do I do this flipped classroom idea? I wasn't really committed to an idea of a flipped classroom. I know that there's a lot of literature out there that shows the benefits of a flipped classroom. I personally haven't seen it succeed to the extent that they say it can, and I know it could, but you need buy-in. You need buy-in from the students, and you need buy-in from the professor. And since I wasn't fully committed, I couldn't try to throw that on my students. So I wanted to leverage what they liked, though. Having the asynchronous elements, having these videos posted online, having these little blurbs to help them understand at their own pace. That was the key. And so what I decided to do, and what our college allowed us to do, was opt to have a hybrid course So I was in the classroom, I had students in the classroom, and we had AV equipment so that we could allow remote students to join. I have students all over the globe, and a number of them elected to stay home either for health reasons or because of visa issues, especially those overseas. So I couldn't in good conscience say I'm only teaching in person, because then I'm neglecting a decent portion of our student body. I couldn't do that to them. And likewise, I couldn't say I'm going fully remote, because I have a decent portion of our students on campus, and they said they wanted to be in person. So it's utilizing some of these asynchronous aspects. It's utilizing this hybrid classroom to try to teach the best I possibly can. Now, I know this isn't a surprise to you, but we understand that mastery of the material is important. Having a strong foundation to build your future, your future knowledge, having that foundation is essential for engineers. To do that, I thought that what I could do is think about how I'm assessing my students. Think about the level of work I'm giving them. Since I'm giving these lectures in person, but I also want to do online videos, I'm asking a lot of them. And this was a point brought up earlier. I believe it was Jim Nacella brought this up in the previous session, how we were over inundating our students, giving them way too much content. So what I decided to do was try to pull back. And I wanted to pull back on homework. Now, I do think that homework can be helpful, but it can be helpful if it's used as an effective tool. Much like a hammer is a very effective tool, it doesn't become so effective when you try to take a screw out with a hammer. And homework's, I think, the same. It can be an effective tool for learning and practice of your learning, but only if you use it in a responsible manner. And so what I wanted to do was pull back on homework assignments. Having access to solution manuals, it can mean that students aren't necessarily going to take the homework seriously. Studies have shown that quizzes and tests are more effective predictors of your final exam performance. So I thought what I'm going to do is use these videos that I want to post online and have them complement homework, complement quizzes, pull back on the length of homework. And so this was how I was going to help my students master the core concepts of engineering while remaining flexible. With these weekly videos, they will go through, much like that little example I showed, they will go through demos, they'll go through problem-solving techniques. The quizzes will tie into those videos that I've posted, and they'll test them on those core concepts. Now, the quizzes, I made them online for a 24-hour period. Take it at any point that you want to, and the students could take it twice. After the first attempt, if they weren't happy with it, you could take it again, and it could shuffle questions and all that kind of stuff, and take the average of the 2 attempts. Here's a quick note. Lesson learned on my part. In the fall semester, I had the 2 attempts, but I had it the highest of 2 attempts would be the score that they got. I quickly learned that students will take advantage of that. And if you allow them to take the quiz twice, and they can have that second attempt with no penalty from the first, oftentimes they just click through to try to get answers and then come back to the second attempt. So averaging the attempts ended up kind of fixing that issue. So adding low stakes quizzes to test these core concepts. And again, because I'm doing that, scale back on homework assignments. I do think that they can be helpful, but at the same time, I was seeing a lot of students, and this was prior to the pandemic, they're spending time on homework, not really trying to teach themselves or test themselves or practice their skills, but it was more just a hurdle to get through. So if I'm adding a hurdle in terms of a quiz, I need to pull back on the homework. Now, how well did this work? I'm just going to show a little bit of data from my classes. This is not definitive. This is not saying how great things are. It's simply trying to understand whether or not homework was an effective predictor of overall performance, and if the quizzes were an effective predictor of overall performance. Again, we're a small department, so I don't have a whole lot of data points here. But the idea was that, okay, how does the homework score correlate to final exam scores? And you can see those homework scores are squished up pretty high, right? everyone tends to do pretty well on homework, especially if you can get access to solutions through Chegg or online solutions manuals. You can collaborate with one another. That's fine. But whether or not that's an effective predictor for the final exam is kind of questionable. If you remove that outlier, the correlation remains somewhat similar. And what does that compare to quizzes, though? Somewhat comparable. You can see the quizzes are a little bit more spread in the range of scores, and removing that one particular outlier dropped the correlation overall. Now, the point is, sure, you can put together correlations. I mean, there's only 22 students here in this set of data. I'm not sure that I'm getting a definitive, yes, quizzes are better than homework. I'm not getting that feel here. But the idea is that I'm not seeing their performance drop. And one of the great pieces of feedback I got was that these quizzes were helpful. And by pulling back on the homework, they appreciated that they had less to do on that time. And the quizzes, they could kind of work on their own time. So again, data is not definitive, but the outcomes aren't necessarily negative. And the thing that I really wanted to highlight here, and the point of this whole talk, me thinking about how do I effectively assess students, how do I effectively deliver education to students, is focusing on the students themselves. And this is something that I've been thinking for a while, and this year solidified it for me. Listening to the students, hearing that being online for those who were remote, it was the hardest part of the class. They did not like it. My students did not like being online. Those who were in person said it made all the difference in the world. My students who could be in the classroom, who could be on campus, were so grateful for that. And so this is making me think, well, first off, what I need to consider in education is empathy. It's empathy. I need to focus on my students. I need to talk to them. I need to say, okay, you need a little bit of extra time here. That's no problem. I'll help you out with that. But this idea of moving forward post-pandemic, this idea of remote instruction, of online learning, it's helpful, it's useful, but it depends on the context. I've got 20 to 30 students every year coming through this department who want to get an engineering degree, and they want to be here in person. They're paying a lot of money to come to a small liberal arts institution to get this education, and they don't want to be online. So that doesn't mean that online learning is not useful. And in fact, it was very useful. It's just that we have to think about the context of online learning. Likewise, education is supposed to set them up for lifelong learning. Right? And again, I know that's been the key this entire morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. But education is supposed to set them up for lifelong learning. So I, as the instructor, have to be smart about how I set them up for that lifelong learning. It all comes together, again, in my opinion, with this keyword of empathy, being flexible. We had to transition online. How do I make sure that those students who don't have access the same way that some of us have broadband, how do I make sure that they can get the material? Is there really a need to make sure that this homework is due at this particular time? Or if a student says, can I get, a little bit of extra time? Yeah, let's let them have a little extra time. Does a quiz need to be a certain amount of time? Or, hey, do this some point today. Scaling back the number of assessments that I'm giving. What matters is seeing, are the students learning? And being empathetic towards their individual needs, which is easier for me to do at a smaller institution than many of you who have thousands of students. I understand. I'm coming from a very different perspective. So what do I keep moving forward? What do I continue to do moving forward? I'm not sure if I'll stick with open book, open note exams, but at the very end of it all, I'm definitely going to be constantly asking my students about them. What do they appreciate? What are they struggling with? What do they need help with? Because empathy, in my opinion, is what helps our students appreciate the learning, what helps the students appreciate being here, appreciate the education, and at the end of the day, it helps them recognize that we're all people, and us recognize that they too are hoping to be professionals one day. So that's my idea here. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to me and to have me here. I appreciate it. And I'll be happy to discuss and take questions with everyone.
Well, thank you, Clayton. That was great, and great that you shared those learnings with us. And I fully resonate with the empathy piece. It's something that's I think important for all of us to have as educators, but also in terms of the professional development of the students. We're a little bit over in terms of trying to stay on time. So I'm going to try to synthesize some of the questions that came up into the Q&A and ask the panelists to respond. And I'll try to do it in two themes. The first one it came up in all three in different ways. I think in Alexandra's most strongly. About the inspiration piece, interaction between the students and the educators, how that impacts diversity. And there's a number of different ways that came up in the different presentations, projects, role models, working in groups. I appreciate the panel sharing their thoughts. Now moving forward into this asynchronous, mixed online, in-person world, what are your thoughts about the most important things we should keep and build upon? I'll start with, actually, Alexandra, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to John and Emanuela.
Sure, yeah, I think inspiration is hugely important. I feel like my role as a visiting professor is to inspire students to want to go on and have successful engineering careers and give them the tools to empower them to make that happen. So I feel like being able to inspire them with real life stories of how engineers are really making a difference in the world and giving them those real life case studies to show this is real, these are the outcomes, you can be a part of this, and linking it to the SDGs, linking it to important global challenges that we have, but making sure also that, you know, in my engagement and also with others that from my professional network that I've brought in to engage with the students, is that the form of communication itself is inspiring, so that they come away from that engagement feeling uplifted, feeling like it's a boost to their confidence, feeling like, you know, they've had a good day because they've interacted with someone who's made them feel inspired.
Thank you. Emanuela, your thoughts?
So interestingly enough, I was hired at UCL at the start of the IEP really because of my industrial background. So I came from engineering, being a professional engineer for about 7 years in the built environment space, and my background is that interdisciplinary space. So I absolutely agree with Alexandra, especially particularly in my first couple of years where I stood out as a non-academic in many ways, just through the language that I brought, the case studies, the opportunities that I would link to, all of the opportunities that are the work that I was doing in my work. Now the challenge is, and a lot of institutions are doing that. They're bringing in people with more, work experience, not just academics with, research, cutting edge research as their main work. So, but what I find in the challenge is, well, then how do I keep that role? I'm now at UCL for just as long as I was practicing, and am I still providing that, right? So that's why it's really interesting, the visiting professor role, because you can bring in new and fresh talent. But for those institutions where they are answering the call to bring more diversity of the leaders in the classroom, to bring in those authentic experiences, how do we allow those people to keep a leg into industry so that they can keep abreast of, the practices that we are trying to formulate within the student experience, right? When they do teams and the type of work and practices that we want them to get into. So that I think is a challenge that perhaps we are facing that is unique to us. But yeah, bring more people in with that experience is is an incredibly important way of doing that. The diversity at the front of the classroom is incredibly important.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I perhaps take a slightly different tack. I mean, I think that everything we've talked about is a balance. I think Clayton talked about the balance between online and face-to-face. I think the balance with industry is an interesting one, in that often there is pressure from industry for these industry-ready graduates, which in many cases mean more training than education. And actually, there is this question about the role. Are we preparing engineering industry-ready graduates, or is the role of a university to prepare graduates for their lifetime career, not just the first job they go into? So I think that's something we have to be careful a little bit in this balance, and particularly how we work with engineers. And the other balance is one that was quite controversial with many of my colleagues, of this, we want more of our students to go into engineering, and of course that would be very nice. But actually, I would love many of our students to go into politics, into all sorts of things. I think engineers there would be just as well. If you've seen UK politics recently, more engineers in UK politics and people who have a vague understanding of science would be beneficial. So I rather like engineering as the modern liberal arts, and I think that again is an interesting dichotomy against, there clearly are shortages of engineers, but equally, what are we educating for and not training our engineers for, I think is a question we really need to answer for the future.
And Clayton, your thoughts?
I don't know if I could add too much more beyond what's already been added, but I do want to mirror Alexander's point that students seeing that kind of industry experience, students seeing people who have done work and that they can resonate with, that's not just the classroom work, that has been very helpful. Even though my work was as a program manager, I wasn't engineering, they love hearing about it because it's different. Well, and maybe it gets me off track and I don't have to talk about the class or the exercise as much. But yeah, I think the one thing too that my students have appreciated and that I certainly see an appreciation for is just enthusiasm. Being excited about what we're learning about, even if we're going to talk about vectors, like, oh boy, vectors, but being excited that we're learning a tool that's going to help us in our study of engineering. And it ties into a point I believe John had made in your talk about engineering. In my kind of view, engineering is learning about the world and learning about how the world works, so you can make the world work better. And that's it. It's like it's building up that tool set. So enthusiasm, I think, helps.
Can I add one more thing, actually?
Sure.
One of the things so the IEP is at the faculty level, and at UCL we're quite an existed, traditional offering. We've got departments with every program. Civil engineering has a department, and the programs associated with it, electrical engineering department and associated with it, and each one of them have an industrial steering group. And many of these are well-established, traditional, groups that in many ways foster the research partnerships and foster more consultative and entrepreneurial partnerships. And more, we're trying to bring it into the educational space, right? Bring these partners into the educational space, even though a lot of the remit of those steering groups was always more aligned with the research and the entrepreneurship of that research, right? And maybe some knowledge exchange when it comes to the PhD students and the work that they're doing. So, one thing that we can certainly do is bring in the projects, the project supervision and things like that. But what I would really like to offer, and I think we're going into the space at the faculty level in the uniqueness, is why not bring an employer in and get them to do a case study on how they dealt with a project? Right? So the team performance issues and leadership structures and EDI issues that have come up. So all of these more skills-based attributes, sort of discussion points that make, that 21st century engineer that we're all striving for, right? Why not bring those in to kind of give that more experiential well-roundedness of what happens in industry? Because I think one of the things that we need to start realizing is that if we keep painting this picture that engineering is all about EDI and that our students can do so much to make diversity a real thing, and then they go into industry and realize that actually in many ways it's not yet there, there's a false implication for that. We're setting them up with some really high standards, and perhaps could be really shocked by what they see. So having those conversations with those industrial partners really pulls out the ones that live and breathe those really strong messages and underpinning principles that we have in our education, right? So yeah, I'd really like to introduce those type of opportunities for our students in the classroom.
Thank you. And it's been my observation too. I mean, we're taking young adults as they go through their journey from 17, 18 to 22, 23, and they need different kinds of inputs as they go on that learning journey. And sometimes it's a project, sometimes it's working in group work, sometimes it's a role model. One of the things that I've found as educators is the learning needs of the students, they're not aware of it themselves yet until they try different things. And then they find what works best for them, whether it's a video or a conversation with a role model, trying something in a team. I think we've heard some great examples. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank all of you. There were very stimulating discussions and presentations. Like Ken Coley, I could talk all day about this. I love this kind of stuff. So thank you all and taking the time for this. So I'd like to hand it back over to Jessie Zhu, who will close out today's symposium and introduce the next symposium. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to summarize, first of all, the excellent presentations. And so we thank to all the speakers and their very useful concept generated. And thanks for the moderators and my colleague, Ken Coley and Andy Hrymak. And thanks for all the participation. If I do a bit of summary, the first session talk about global picture, ultimate goals of education. And the second one, the 3 deans from, plus Ken, the 4 deans of Canada talk about strategies, curriculum, what is happening. The last session talk about teaching experience, details, and so there are more to come. Especially the next symposium will be on July the 26th. We'll be talking more about teaching experience classroom. And the next one will be on this topic, and will be chaired by Clayton, our last speaker, and me. It will be a symposium within the annual meeting of the American Society of Engineering Education. It's on July 26th. So more information will be sent to you, and you're most welcome to do that. And once again, thanks for all the speakers and the panelists, moderators. Thanks for all the participants. It's a good experience working with all of you. Bye.